Okay, we're in the Rambam's Guide of the Perplexed. This is part 1, chapter 34. It says, the causes that prevent the commencement of instruction with divine science, the indication of things that ought to be indicated, and the presentation of this to the multitude are 5. The first cause is the difficulty, subtlety, and obscurity of the matter in itself. The scripture says, that which was is far off and exceedingly deep. Who can find it out? Ecclesiastes 7:24. And it is said, but wisdom, where shall it be found? Job 28:12. Now it is not fitting in teaching to begin with what is most difficult and obscure for the understanding. One of the parables generally known in our community is that likening knowledge to water. Now the sages, peace be on them, explain several notions by means of this parable. One of them being that he who knows how to swim brings up pearls from the bottom of the sea, whereas he who does not know drowns. For this reason, no one should expose himself to the risks of swimming except he who has been trained in learning to swim. The second case is the insufficiency of the minds of all men at their beginnings. For man is not granted his ultimate perfection at the outset, for perfection exists in him only potentially, and in his beginnings he lacks this act. Accordingly, it is said, and man is born a wild ass. Job 11:12. Nor is it necessarily obligatory in the case of every individual who is endowed with something in potency that this thing should become actual. Sometimes it remains in its defective state, either because of certain obstacles or because of papacy of training in what transforms that potentiality into actuality. Accordingly, it is clearly said, not many are wise. Job 32, verse 9. The sages too, may their memory be blessed, have said, I saw the people who have attained a high rank, and they are few. For the obstacles to perfection are very many, and the objects that distract from it abound. When should he be able to achieve the perfect preparation and leisure required for training, so that what subsists in a particular individual in potency should be transformed into actuality? The third cause lies in the length of the preliminaries, for man has in his nature a desire to seek the ends, and he often finds preliminaries tedious and refuses to engage in them. Know, however, that if an end could be achieved without the preliminaries that precede it, the latter would not be preliminaries, but pure distractions and futilities. Now, if you would awaken a man, even though he were the dullest of all people, as one awakens a sleeping individual, if you were able to ask him whether he desired at that moment to have knowledge of the heavenly spheres, namely, what their number is and what their configuration and what is contained within them and what the angels are and how the world as a whole was created and what its end is in view of the arrangement of its various parts with one another, and what the soul is and how it is created in time in the body, and whether the human soul can be separated from the body, and if it can, in what manner and through what instrument and with what distinction in view. And if you put the same question to him with regard to other subjects of research to this kind, he would undoubtedly answer you in the affirmative. He would have a natural desire to know these things as they are in truth, but he would wish this desire to be allayed, and the knowledge of all this to be achieved by means of one of two words that you would say to him. If, however, you would lay upon him the obligation to abandon his occupation for a week's time until he should understand all this, he would not do it, but would be satisfied with deceptive imaginings through which his soul would be set at ease. He would also dislike being told that there is a thing whose knowledge requires many premises and a long time for investigation. You know that these matters are mutually connected, there being nothing in what exists besides God. May he be exalted in the totality of things he has made. For this totality includes everything comprised in what exists except only him. There is moreover no way to apprehend him except it be through the things he has made, for they are indicative of his existence, of what ought to be believed about him, I mean to say, of what should be affirmed and denied with regard to him. It is therefore indispensable to consider all beings as they really are, so that we obtain for all the kinds of beings true and certain premises that would be useful to us in our researches pertaining to the divine science. How very many are the premises thus taken from the nature of the numbers and the properties of geometrical figures, from which we draw inferences concerning things that we should deny with respect to God, may he be exalted. And this denial is indicative to us of many notions. As for the matters pertaining to the astronomy of the spheres and to natural science, I do not consider that you should have any difficulty in grasping that those are matters necessary for the apprehension of the relation of the world to God's governance, as this relation is in truth, and not according to imaginings. There are also many speculative subjects that, although no premises can be obtained from them for the use of this science, nevertheless train the mind and procure it the habitus of drawing inferences and knowledge of the truth in matters pertaining to its essence. They also put an end to the confusion in most of the minds of those engaged in speculation. A confusion mistaking things that are accidental for those that are essential, whereby an end is also put to the perversion of opinions arising out of confusion. All this is achieved in addition to the representation of these subjects as they really are, even if they in no way belong to the divine science. These matters are also not devoid of utility in other points, namely with respect to matters that lead up to that science. Accordingly, it is certainly necessary for whoever wishes to achieve human perfection to train himself at first in the art of logic, then in the mathematical sciences according to the proper order, then in the natural sciences, and after that in the divine science. We find many people whose mind stops short at one of these sciences, and sometimes even in their mind does not miss the mark. They are cut off by death while engaged in some preliminary study. Accordingly, if we never in any way acquired an opinion through following traditional authority and were not correctly conducted toward something by means of parables, but were obligated to achieve a perfect representation by means of essential definitions, and by pronouncing true only that which is meant to be pronounced true in virtue of a demonstration, which would be impossible except after the above-mentioned lengthy preliminary studies, this state of affairs would lead to all people dying without having known whether there is a deity for the world or whether there is not, much less whether a proposition would be affirmed with regard to him or a defect denied. Nobody would ever be saved from this perdition except one of a city or two of a family. Jeremiah 3:14. As for a few solitary individuals that are the remnant whom the Lord calls, Joel 3:5, only after the above-mentioned preliminary studies. Solomon has made it clear that the need for preliminary studies is a necessity and that it is impossible to attain true wisdom except after having been trained. For he says, if the iron be blunt and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength, but even more preparation is needed for wisdom. Ecclesiastes 10:10. And he also says, hear counsel and receive instruction, that thou mayest be wise in thy latter end. Proverbs 19, verse 20. There is also a necessity of another kind for achieving knowledge of the preliminary studies. It arises from the fact that when a man seeks to obtain knowledge quickly, many doubts occur to him, and he moreover quickly understands objections, I mean to say the destruction of a particular doctrine, this being similar to the demolition of a building. Now, the establishment of doctrines as true and the solution of doubts can only be grounded upon many premises taken from the preliminary studies. One engaged in speculation without preliminary study is therefore comparable to someone who walked on his 2 feet in order to reach a certain place, and while on his way fell into a deep well without having any device to get out of there before he perishes. It would have been better for him if he had foregone walking and had greatly remained in his own place. In Proverbs, Solomon describes at length the state of lazy people and their incapacity. All this being a parable for the incapacity to seek knowledge of the sciences, thus speaking of the desire of someone desirous to achieve his ends, but making no effort to achieve knowledge of the preliminary studies leading up to these ends, does nothing else but desire. He says, the desire of the slothful kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. He coveteth greedily all day long, but the righteous giveth and spareth not. In these verses, he says that the reason why the desire of the slothful kills him is to be found in the fact that he makes no effort and does not work with a view to that which would allay that desire. He has only an abundance of longing and nothing else, while he aspires to things of whose achievement he lacks the necessary instrument. It would be healthier for him if he renounced this desire. Consider now how the ending of the parable explains its beginning, for its dictum, but the righteous giveth and spareth not. The word righteous is not antithetical to slothful, except according to the explanation we have propounded. For Solomon says that the just one among men is he who gives everything its due. He means thereby that he gives all his time to seeking knowledge and spares no portion of his time for anything else. He says, as it were, but the righteous gives his days to wisdom and is not sparing of them, which corresponds to his saying, give not thy strength unto women. Proverbs 31, verse 3. Now, the majority of men of knowledge, I mean those generally known as men of knowledge, labor under this disease. I mean that which consists in seeking to achieve ends and in speaking about them without having engaged in the studies preliminary to them. With some of them, their ignorance or their desire to have the first place goes so far as to cause them to disapprove of these preliminary studies, which they are incapable of grasping or are too lazy to seek to understand. Accordingly, they wish to show that these studies are harmful or useless. However, when one reflects, the truth of the matter is clear and manifest. The fourth cause is to be found in the natural aptitudes, for it has been explained, or rather demonstrated, that the moral virtues are a preparation for the rational virtues, it being impossible to achieve true rational acts. I mean perfect rationality, unless it be by a man thoroughly trained with respect to his morals and endowed with the qualities of tranquility and quiet. There are, moreover, many people who have received from their first natural disposition a complexion of temperament with which perfection is in no way compatible. Such is the case of one whose heart is naturally exceedingly hot, for he cannot refrain from anger, even if he subject his soul to very stringent training. This is also the case of one whose testicles have a hot and humid temperament and are of a strong constitution, in whom the seminal vessels abundantly generate semen, for it is unlikely that such a man, even if he subject his soul to the most severe training, should be chaste. Similarly, you can find among people rash and reckless folk whose movements, being very agitated and disordered, indicate a corruption of the complexion and a poor quality of the temperament, of which it is impossible to give an account. Perfection can never be perceived in such people, and to make an effort to their benefit in this matter is pure ignorance on the part of him who makes the effort. For this science, as you know, is not like the science of medicine or the science of geometry, and not everyone has the disposition required for it in the various respects we have mentioned. It is accordingly indubitable that preparatory moral training should be carried out before beginning with the science, so that man should be in a state of extreme uprightness and perfection. For the perverse is an abomination to the Lord, but his secret is with the righteous. Proverbs 3:32. For this reason, the teaching of the sciences to the young is disapproved of. In fact, it is impossible for them to absorb it because of the effervescence of their natures and of their minds being occupied with the flame of growth. When, however, this flame that gives rise to perplexity is extinguished, the young achieve tranquility and quiet, and their hearts submit and yield with respect to their temperament. They then may call upon their souls to raise themselves up to this rank, which is that of the apprehension of him, may he be exalted. I mean thereby the divine science that is designated as the account of the chariot, Maaseh Merkava. Accordingly, Scripture says, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, Psalm 34:19, and it says, I dwell in the high and holy place with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit, and so on. It's Isaiah 57:15. For this reason, they say in the Talmud with respect to the dictum of the sages, the Mishnah, the chapter headings may be transmitted to him. The chapter headings ought not to be transmitted except to a president of the court and one whose heart within him is full of care. So the purpose of this is to signify obedience, submission, and great piety joined to knowledge. It is also said there, the mysteries of the Torah may only be transmitted to a counselor, wise in crafts, and endowed with understanding of whispering. Now these are matters that undoubtedly require natural predisposition. Do you not know among various people one who is very feeble in point of opinion, though he be the most understanding of men? Another, on the other hand, may have an unerring opinion and an excellent way of conducting affairs in political matters. Such a one is called a counselor. However, someone that sort might not understand an intelligible notion, even though it were close to being one of the first intelligibles. He might be very stupid and lacking in ingenious devices. Thus it is said, wherefore is there a price in the hand of a fool to buy wisdom, seeing he hath no heart for it? Among the men there is also found one who is naturally full of understanding and perspicacity, and capable of giving concise and coherent expression of the most hidden notions. Such a one is called endowed with understanding of whispering. However, someone of this sort does not necessarily occupy himself with and achieve knowledge of the sciences. The one who actually has achieved knowledge of the sciences is called wise in crafts. Of him the sages say, when he speaks, they all become deaf. Consider how, by means of a text of a book, they laid down as conditions of the perfection of the individual, his being perfect in the varieties of political regimens, as well as in the speculative sciences, and with all his possessing natural perspicacity and understanding, and the gift of finally expressing himself and communicating notions in flashes. So, if all this is realized in someone, then the mysteries of the Torah may be transmitted to him. It is likewise said there, Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Elazar, come so that I should teach you the account of the chariot. Whereupon Rabbi Elazar said to him, I am not yet old. He means, I am not yet aged, and up to now find myself in effervescence of nature and the recklessness of adolescence. See accordingly how they posed age as a condition superadded to the above-mentioned excellencies. How then could one plunge into these studies together with all the multitude, the children and the women? The fifth cause is to be found in the fact that men are occupied with the necessities of the body, which are the first perfection, in more particularly if in addition they are occupied with the taking of a wife and of children, and even more especially if there is in them superadded to that a demand for the superfluidities of life, which becomes an established habitus as a result of a bad conduct of life and bad customs. Things are so that if even a perfect man, as we have mentioned, were to occupy himself much with these necessary things, and all the more if he were to occupy himself with unnecessary things, and if his desire for them should grow strong, he would find that his theoretical desires had grown weak and had been submerged, and his demand for them would slacken and become intermittent and inattentive. He accordingly would not grasp things that otherwise would have been within his power to grasp, or else he would grasp them with a confused apprehension, a mixture of apprehension and failure to apprehend. In view of all these causes, these matters are only for a few solitary individuals of a very special sort, not for the multitude. For this reason, they should be hidden from the beginner and should be prevented from taking them up, just as a small boy is prevented from taking coarse foods and from lifting heavy weights.